In this lesson, we're going to talk about the second major category of software. We already talked about operating systems. That's the first category. The second is application software. Now, in regard to the basics, we've already talked about a definition of software. Just the instructions that run on a computer are called software. And as we talked about in the last lesson, there are two major types, the operating system and then the application software. The application software turns the computer system into useful tools, allowing the user to perform specific tasks. Now, just a brief listing of, and this is probably a review of the major application programs that you may use. There's word processing and desktop publishing, spreadsheets, graphics programs, database programs, which we will go into more detail about in our next lesson. But as far as some terminology or definitions when we're talking about software, the first is documentation. Now, those are the instructions for using the software, and that's what it is called, the documentation. How do you use it, and basic instructions on maybe installation of the software, and again, just how to use the software, but that's called the documentation. Many times that will come in a pamphlet or a booklet that's packaged with the software, but more and more you'll go online to actually get the documentation and download it, or it will come on a CD. The licensing agreement is the set of terms to which the user consents in order to use that software. Now, I want to define the three types of licenses. There's an individual license, and that allows the user or the individual who purchased that particular software to load and use it on a computer. Now, some individual license will allow you to load it on more than one, for example, a desktop and then a laptop. There's a site license, and the site license allows the user to load and use the software on a specific number of computers. So, for example, if you're in one of our computer labs, we may have purchased a site license for a particular software, and it allows us to load that software individually on a certain number of computers. So, instead of purchasing multiple individual licenses, we would purchase a site license, and we would pay, for example, to load that separately on 25 computers in the lab. And then the next, and let's differentiate between a site license and a network license. A network license allows the user to load the software on a network server and then allow access by a specific number of networked computers. So what that means is that it's loaded once onto a server, onto one computer, but then since there's a network and other computers are hooked to that network and can access the software that's loaded on that server, then we would pay for a specific number of those network computers to access that. So we're loading it only once on the server, where the site license allows us to load it on multiple computers. The network license allows us to load it on a server, and then we'll be very specific as to the number of computers that can actually access it. And I know in the past most of our software is networked, and some of the programs that we would have if we had a network license, and for example, if we purchased a network license for 10 computers to be able to access it, then when the 11th computer tried to access that software, it would not allow it. Anytime you agree or as a company agrees to these licensing agreements, then you are bound to go by the specifics of that licensing agreement. Violation of that licensing agreement is known as software piracy. And so if you purchase a particular software package and you load it on your computer and then you just hand it off to a friend and say, here, just copy it, put it on your computer, that is software piracy. And it's not that the software police are running around everywhere knocking on your door, but if you do get caught, there are stiff penalties regarding software piracy. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is an upgrade. If you're a registered user of a particular software and the latest release comes out, many times you can purchase just an upgrade, not a whole entire new package, and you get that at a reduced price. So that's known as an upgrade. And when we're talking about word processes or word processing, in order to process those words, we have to have a word processing program. And always I'm putting this / desktop publishing, and that's a particular type of application software. Two of the most popular are Microsoft Word and Corel WordPerfect. And just to review steps in word processing, what it allows you to do, not just to type a bunch of words on a page. You can enter text, but other things that you can do, it's the most wonderful thing that they've ever invented, is that undo button. Life was so much easier after they came up with undo. We can find and replace. There's a thesaurus, dictionaries, all types of things, spell check. And so that allows us to edit what we've done. And then we can format. We can change the colors, the font. We can align it to the left, to the right, to the up, to the down. And there's things known as leading and kerning, and those are maybe two terms you're not as familiar with. Leading is the space between lines on a page, so the space between the word leading and kerning, that can be set to be smaller or a larger space. And then kerning is actually the space between the individual letters. Now, when we proofread our document, we do use spell check, or we should, but always, especially in the workplace, even if you use a spell check, you still need to get into the habit of proofreading documents, because we all know that words can be spelled correctly, but they're not grammatically correct. You know, TWO, TOO, TO, those types of things. So we need to be really careful and proofread everything. Of course, I said one of the most important things to do is save your documents frequently, just in case there's any type of power outage. And then also allows us to print our documents. So all of you have done all of this, some in more detail than others, but we really are able to do fancy, professional looking documents with word processing software now. In addition to just being able to do word processing, those programs such as Word allow us the ability to create web pages. Used to, we had to always purchase web authoring software in order to do that, because documents on the web, and I know I'm saying this a lot, in another lesson we're going to talk about this a lot more, about the web, the internet, and but just so you'll know off the bat that in order to create a document and it be viewed on the web, it has to be created in what's called HTML, or hypertext markup language. And some people know this, you know, computer programmers, web designers know this hypertext markup language, but most of us don't. And used to, you had to either know this language or purchase a web authoring software package. But now if you have a Word document, you can save that document as an HTML document, and it converts it to this hypertext markup language. And again, all web pages have to be written in HTML in order to be viewed on the web. You can't just put a Word document up there. It has to be in HTML in order for it to be viewed on the web. And when we want to process numbers, we use spreadsheets, those electronic ledgers that allow us to manipulate number data. We can enter formulas into the spreadsheet that allow for us to do calculations that in the past had to be done manually. And in addition, then we can demonstrate that numerical data in a graphic, such as a chart. And so when we look at, sometimes it's a lot easier, rather than just looking at this big spreadsheet full of numbers, to actually show that in a picture form, basically, and do charts and graphs. Some of the examples of common spreadsheet packages: Microsoft Excel, Lotus 1-2-3, and many of you who have taken CIS 146 are familiar with Excel. Others may have used Lotus 1-2-3 on the job or at home. And this is an example of just one of the pages or books if you create an Excel spreadsheet. But let's do some naming or some terminology here of the different things you'll see. The first the first bar, where you have File with your drop-down menus and Edit and View and Insert, that is called the menu bar. Below it is a toolbar that has the icons for saving, opening documents, copying to clipboard, those types of things. That's called a menu bar, and you can manipulate these and have things showing up on your menu bars and your toolbars that, excuse me, I think I said the first is the menu bar, the second is the toolbar, and you can put different icons in here. You can move these around to be placed in a certain location on your spreadsheet. We have a formatting toolbar that allows us to change the font, bold it, put it in italics, then align. Each little square in the spreadsheet is known as a cell, and in its entirety, this whole thing is known as the worksheet. And then you'll notice I've pointed out at the bottom, you'll see tabs: Sheet 1, Sheet 2, Sheet 3. So you can have multiple worksheets within one spreadsheet. Or if you create a chart from the data that you've entered in your spreadsheet, you can have it show up on a separate sheet. And so that's what these tabs are for, to navigate, but they are called sheet tabs. Here's examples, again, of just data entered into a spreadsheet. And these are the graphs that were generated just from this small amount of data. We can do a pie graph or a pie chart. We can do column graphs. We can do line graphs. All different types of things. They're called scatter diagrams, all types. And many of these, some of you will learn when you take your quality improvement class, and you'll actually be doing these. I wanted to point out, as far as a pie graph goes, many of you know this, some may not, is that while a column graph or a bar graph shows specific numbers, like how many, this is an example by month of a certain incident, and it shows those actual numbers or represents them on this column or bar graph, where a pie graph takes the overall and shows you a certain percentage rather than specific numbers. And so, for example, one incident happened in January, and 7 in February on this particular spreadsheet. And so they'll show it as a percentage of the whole instead of specific numbers. Now, in regard to how spreadsheets work, they're composed of columns and rows, and each individual square is known as a cell, and each cell has an address. And so when you're speaking of a spreadsheet, you talk about the row and the column where the data is located, or which cell. Example, the first cell in the first row, the first cell in the first row of the first column would have the designation of A1. Now, in this example, A represents which column that cell is in, and the 1 represents the row number. There are different types of cells. There are numeric, where we just put numbers in. There's alphanumeric, where we can put letters and numbers. We can put formulas in to help us manipulate or do calculations with our numbers. Mathematical equations. You can add, multiply, subtract, divide. And these are entered into the formula bar. There are also functions. Functions are those things such as sums or averages. So instead of adding everything up and then dividing it by a certain number to find an average, then you can just put that function in, and the spreadsheet does it for you. Also, square root. It's an example of a function. With database programs or database management systems, DBMS, these are used for storing, organizing, and manipulating large amounts of information, because a database is just a collection of information that's accessible by a computer. And I've said this many times. One of the prime examples is the Master Patient Index in the Health Information Management Department. That's a huge amount of information. We'll keep the same information on every patient that comes in, and that's a database. A database can be as simple as just an electronic address book, or it can be as extensive as the U.S. Census. That's kept in a database. So again, the most widely used database in health information is the Master Patient Index. And when we start talking about the electronic health record, we're going to really talk about databases, because all information in the electronic health record is housed in multiple databases. Now, here's just an example in Microsoft Access, which is a database program, of one particular patient in the Master Patient Index, which I said was a very common database that we use. And so when we have last name, first name, middle name, date of birth, medical record number, maybe address, we always have the admission discharge dates, the physician, and usually the disposition for each admission. And so we will keep this same exact information on every patient. Now, with the features of a database, it allows us to sort, to find things in the database, to ask the database a question. This is called a query. That's the common language. And in order for us to do this, a database has to be written in what is called SQL, or structured query language. That's what allows us to ask the database a question. And what I mean by a question, you can query it, for example, the Master Patient Index for all the patients named Jones. And so then it'll go and find those, bring those up, and then you can narrow that down and ask a question and say, I need to see all the Thomas Jones, and then it'll narrow that down. And so you can ask the database questions. You can have links within the database that join two databases together so that the data can be shared. And again, I'm going to talk about this in more detail in the lesson on databases. And then, of course, we have output. We can do reports from the database. We can do mailing labels. There's a multitude of things that we can have as output from our database. We can have project management software. An example of this is Microsoft Project, but many companies, many facilities will use this if they are planning a project, because there are a lot of tools in there. There are Gantt charts, calendars, status reports, material reports of what's been used in the project, a Gantt chart, and you'll learn this in your quality improvement class. But for those of you who don't have to take quality improvement, a Gantt chart is just a chart that shows the progress in graphic form of the project, the different steps in the project, who's responsible for them, when they're due to be completed, when they're actually completed, those types of things. So you can use project management software. We have presentation software that you're looking at right now. Prime example is PowerPoint. It's where you can create a presentation. You can combine text, numbers, graphics. You can put sound into PowerPoint presentations or just presentations. You can put movies. There's all types of things you can do with presentations. They can be projected onto a screen. And you as a student have spent much of your life, I know, staring at a screen with a PowerPoint presentation on it. We can print the note pages of our presentations, or we can print them onto transparencies. When I say back in the old days, which was just a very few years ago, we used the overhead projectors where we wrote on the transparencies, and then PowerPoint allowed us to actually print transparencies. We can actually put those Mylar sheets into the printer and print onto those. There's not that much need for that anymore, because most people have gone to the LCD projectors that project on a screen rather than an overhead projector. But that is one of the actual things you can do with this presentation software. So again, Microsoft PowerPoint, the most common, but again, Corel presentations. Corel has that Office suite also, and they just call theirs Corel presentations. It's basically the same or has the same functions. Personal Information Managers, or PIMs. These are basically your calendars and your address books. Example, Microsoft Outlook, which also has an email function, but that allows you to, for those of you who haven't used Outlook, that's where you would access your email, but then you can also have the calendar, put things in the calendar that remind you, that will give you an alarm. You know, you have this due, you have to go here, you have to be here. Those types of things. You can do your to-do list, and it will pop that up on the screen when you log in and say, you know, this is what you're supposed to do, and you can prioritize things as far as their importance of when they get done. So it really helps as far as just organization. There's money management. This is more on a personal level. You probably don't use this at work, but you know, you can use these money management programs. Many times they do come bundled with your computer to balance your checkbook, to do accounting, to help you with preparing your taxes. And so just some of the names of these that may be familiar to you. Quicken, there's Microsoft Money. Of course, every year you could go and purchase something called TurboTax, which will help you with your tax preparation. Then there's Creativity software. This allows you to create graphics, to paint, draw, to manipulate photographs that have been digitized, or to allow you to digitize photographs. And I want to point out here some of the formats that you'll see for graphics or for pictures, basically. You can have a bitmap, and you'll know this because there is an extension on your file. For example, your picture's named flowers. It'll say dot, and according to how you save that file, it may have a .bmp, meaning bitmap, behind it. These are basically large files, and they take up a lot of space. So when you are saving your graphics, you can actually choose to save it in a different format. But one of the graphics formats that you may see is a bitmap. JPEG stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group, and that extension may be JPEG or JPG, and this compresses graphics, and so they don't take up as much space. You also may see the extension TIFF, T-I-F-F, standing for Tagged Image Format Files, and either, just according to who you're talking to, a GIF or GIF. Some people say GIF, Graphics Interchange Format. But the main thing here is to understand that the JPEGs, that compresses the photograph or the picture, the image, and the others mainly I just wanted you to be familiar with or recognize that if you saw that at the end of the name, or if that's the extension on a file name, that you know that that is a picture, that's an image. Now, multimedia software. A lot of software that we use will allow us to combine speech, text, graphics, animations. We can have movies, we can have sound, and all of this put together is just known as multimedia. And as we were talking about a minute ago, for example, in PowerPoint and presentation, you have multimedia in there because you can do all types of things. You can insert, your text, your graphics, your pictures. You can put sound, you can put music, you can put all types of things, but all that together is just known as multimedia. Adobe. Now, anybody that's taken any of my online classes is very familiar with PDF documents. I do a lot of my answer sheets, or I just actually do anything that I'm going to post online in a PDF format. And Adobe Acrobat allows the user to create what's known as a platform independent document, and these will have that extension PDF, portable document file, on the end. And the reason that I use them, or anyone else would use them, is that they are platform independent. It doesn't matter what you're using on your computer as far as your platform. Windows, if you're using the Apple operating systems or Mac operating systems, that you can view these. And sometimes, if I say, for example, if I was to put a Word document, you would have to have the Word viewer, or actually that Word program on your computer, in order to view it. And even so, sometimes, as I say, this is a clinical, technical term, it comes out wonky, like it'll be falling off the page where the original didn't do that. But with a PDF file, just what I see on my screen when I create that PDF file is exactly what you're going to see on your screen when you pull that up. And so it's platform independent. MIDI software. I think most people are familiar with this. It's software is available that for PC use that allows you can teach music on the computer now, and you can compose music using the electronic keyboards. And so what MIDI software allows is to produce a sound that is computerized, but it may sound like a violin, or it may sound like a different instrument. And so that's what MIDI software, most of you have all heard a MIDI file. A lot of them, they're on telephone ringtones, or if you've opened up a greeting card. And sometimes MIDI files have a little kind of a tinny sound. They don't sound exactly like the regular music would, but that's what MIDI software is. But you can also connect a musical instrument via a digital interface, and actually as you play, for example, a keyboard that's connected to the computer, then through this software it will write the actual musical notes for you. So if you're composing, you would have to sit there and draw those in. It does it for you. Another type of basically a format for music is MP3. We have MP4 files too, but MP3 allows tens of megabytes or a huge number or amount of data to be compressed into just a few megabytes so that it can be stored and it can be transmitted easily. With some audio files, they take up a huge amount of space, but MP3, while it's very high quality sound, it is compressed, and so it allows, if you want to transmit it over the internet or you want to store it, then it doesn't take up a huge amount of space. Two more things as far as terminology and different types of software. As far as ownership, we talked about privacy in our licensing agreements, or piracy in licensing agreements. Not all software is created by commercial firms, and you don't have to purchase all of it. Some software is produced just by independent programmers. They distribute their work as either freeware or shareware. And to differentiate between the two, freeware is software that you can copy and you can distribute it at no cost. Now, the person who created it still owns the copyright to it, so you can't make money off of it, but you're free to use it. You just cannot download it, use it, and then start selling it. So the author retains the copyright, where shareware differs from freeware in what the author of that software expects after the users try the program. If the users don't continue to use the program, or they're usually required to then delete it from their computers, or if they continue to use it, they'll agree to actually pay a small amount of money for it, or they may be asked to. But that's the difference between freeware and shareware. So in this particular lesson, when we're talking about applications, we talked about various application software packages or programs that allow the user to perform tasks. Examples of what we looked at: word processing, spreadsheet, database, presentation. We looked at project management and also the creativity software for graphics and for sound.